Welcome to Lesson 4 in our Introduction to Algebra unit. Today we're going to talk about just learning some of the terminology so we can communicate with algebra using proper vocabulary. And this lesson is pretty short. It's probably the shortest one we've had so far. So you have a handout, and on the handout you can add your notes as we go. Here's our new terminology. Coefficient is the number in front of a letter. So right here, that's the negative 23. That's a coefficient. Variable, that's the letters, because variable, think of something that varies or that changes. That's, in this case, there's an x and a y. There's two variables here. Not the squared, just the letters, the x and the y. A term is when you put it all together. This whole thing is 23x squared y, and we know that from our work with exponents. The whole thing is called a term. A monomial is just if you have one term, like 3ab. I hope that white shows up for you. It's a bit faint. 3ab is one term. It's one piece all together because everything's attached with multiplication. That's 3 times a times b, so that's a monomial. A binomial is two terms, and you know it's two terms because of this plus or minus sign separating the two pieces. That makes it two terms there. Trinomial is three terms, so again, you have a plus or minus sign separating a term. A polynomial that's just a general term we use if you have one or more terms. So I could call any of these polynomials. So 3ab plus 4, that's a polynomial. A constant is a number that has no letter. So this was our, grade 1, 2, 3, 4. We only worked with constants. We didn't have any algebra yet. We didn't have any letters. So just a 4 is a constant. You can remember that because a constant is the same all the time. If your parents are constantly telling you to clean your room, it's the same thing over and over. A 4 will always be a 4. It's never going to change because we don't have a variable with it to change it. The last new terminology piece is a degree. This is a little confusing, this one. It's the sum of all the exponents of the term. So we've got 4x squared y cubed. So I take the exponents, that's a 3 and a 2, and I add them together and I get a 5th degree polynomial. So the degree of that one is 5. So let's do this chart. And this is our only example. This is all we're doing here. So first let's talk about the type of polynomial. We're going to fill in this row first. Type of polynomial, 2x squared. That's just one thing. There's no plus or minus putting a second piece on it. It's just one. So it's a monomial. The next one also, what do you think? It's a monomial. The next one, 7m squared minus 2m squared n squared, has a minus sign in between. So it's separating this term from this term. So there's two terms here. That makes it a binomial. What about negative 12? That's NA. That's where it says where applicable here. This one's not applicable because it's not a polynomial. Polynomial has to have some variables in it. So this isn't a polynomial. It's just a constant. The next one is a trinomial because it's got 3 pieces to it. And the second last one, what do you think? It's a binomial. And that last one looks a little tricky because it's kind of big and awkward, but there's no plus or minus signs. So it all goes together. It's grouped together as one term. It's a monomial. Now let's talk about the coefficients. So you're filling in your handout as we go. Once I do the first few, you might want to pause and then see if you can get the rest of the row by yourself. So the coefficient, if you remember from the previous slide, that's the number in front of the term, of the variable. So the 2 is the coefficient for the first one. The second one has a 0.3 for a coefficient. So you want to press pause, fill in the rest. Maybe I'll give you one more first because this is a binomial here. It has 2 coefficients. That's why I have the S in brackets here because there's more than one possibility. Coefficients are 7 and negative 2. Okay. Next one, again, kind of tricky. It doesn't have a coefficient because it's not, there's no variable. If it were negative 12x, then the negative 12 would be a coefficient, but there's no coefficient here because it's not a monomial term. Next one has 3 coefficients. Each number, I'm going to list the 4 twice because it's a coefficient for 2 different terms. How about the next one? K to the power of 4 plus 2. What do you think the coefficient is here? So we already know this is not a coefficient. A constant is not a coefficient. We talked about that over here. But I don't see any number in front of the k to the power of 4. But there is an invisible number there. It's a 1. So there's always, as long as you have a variable, there's always a coefficient. And our last term has a 1/2 for the coefficient. Now let's look at the variables. Variables are the letters. X is a variable, not x squared, just x. So our second one has two variables. It has an m and an n. And again, if you want to press pause here, fill in the chart. I think you've got the hang of what the rest of this row is going to look like. We've got another m and n. Those are the only letters in that question. What about that -12, that pesky -12? It's always confusing. No, it doesn't have any variables, not applicable. The trinomial, it's got an a and a b. So sometimes students get confused. They think if it's a trinomial, it's got to have 3 terms or something, or 3 variables. It doesn't. So this one just has a's and b's, right? And same thing with this. This was a monomial here. It was 1 term, but it had 2 letters. So these 2 words don't have anything to do with each other. The k is the only variable in the second last one, and the final one has an x and a y and a z. It's got 3 variables. So this one's the one that's most confusing, I think, of all of them, the degree. So the degree is the highest exponent in the polynomial. And in this one, we only have 1 because it's monomial, so the degree is a 2. The exponent is a 2. Here we also have a monomial. So remember, you take all the exponents and you add them together in the term. So that's a 2 plus a 3. So that degree is a 5. So now we have a binomial. Which one are we going to take? We choose the highest if we have more than 1 term. I have 2 terms here. It's a binomial. This term has a degree of 3. This term has a degree of 4, 2 plus 2. So the degree, we're going to use, we pick the highest one, which is the 4. -12, again, doesn't have a degree. Technically, it has a degree of 0. Let me just write that in there. I don't think the textbook, I don't think we get into that this much this year. But really, you could put, say, x to the power of 0 here. Because x to the power of 0 is 1, that would give you -12 times 1, so that's the same as -12. That's the same as -12. So you could have a 0 here. I just can't remember if the back of the book says NA or it says a 0, but I just wanted to go over that so that you would remember that one. Next one has a degree of 4 because again we have multiple. We have a trinomial, so we have multiple, we have this is a degree of 2, this one's a degree of 2, there's a 1 here and a 1 here. This one's a degree of 4 because we have a power of 3 on the b and an invisible power of 1 on the a. When we add those together, we get a degree of 4, which is the same as the next one. It's a degree of 4. Now last one, add up the exponents here. This is 1 term, so we're going to put them all together. The x is cubed, the y has a degree of 1, and the z has a degree of 2. That gives us a degree of 6. Last thing is a constant. A constant, remember, is the thing, that's what your parents are constantly telling you to clean your room. That's the same thing over and over again. That's just a number. A constant is a plain old number. And the first example, the monomial here, doesn't have a plain number. It's got a monomial 2. The 2 is a monomial, but it's not a constant. What about the next one? Is there a regular plain number there with no letters? Nope, no constant there. Third one, do we have a constant in the third one? Is there any number that won't change? So the reason I'm saying won't change is if, let's say m was equal to 1, or if m were equal to 2, as soon as I sub a 2 in here, I'm going to get 2 cubed, I'm going to get 8. This is no longer a 7, this is now 7 times 8, right? This number has changed because of the variable. So it's not constant. That 7 won't stay as 7. So there's no constant there. And finally, in our row under the -12, we can put something other than NA. -12 is a constant. The trinomial, is there a constant in that trinomial? Is there any letter, or is there any number that is a simple number with no letters attached? No. How about the second last one, k to the power 4 minus 2? Does this one have a constant? Yes, it does. It has a 2. And our very last one, any constant here? No, because the 1/2 is a coefficient at the front. There's no other numbers, so there's no constant there. So that is it. That's your terminology that you need so that we can communicate with algebra, and we all are using the proper vocabulary we need to do.